Have you ever wondered if the narcissist in your life is being truthful or if he's just weaving another web of lies? If he's just going to another level to convince you that he's being truthful when he's actually just lying? I want to talk today about how to spot between a narcissist's lies and the narcissist's truth, because oftentimes this is one of the biggest pieces that people get confused on, and they stay in the relationship longer than they should or longer than they even want to because they're not sure what to believe. Again, remember the baseline premise is if a narcissist can keep you confused, then you will continue to lose. If a narcissist keeps you in the fog, then you will stay longer than what you should and than what you want to because you don't actually know the truth. So let's talk about different ways that you can actually see and understand the truth today in your relationship. If you guys are new here, my name is Ben Taylor. I'm a self-aware narcissist on this channel to provide awareness of narcissistic abuse. I break people free from mental and emotional trauma bonds that they've been stuck with or obsessing about this narcissistic person in their life, whether in the relationship or out of the relationship. If you want to learn how I do that, you can go to claritychallenge.net today. If you want to interact with me personally one-on-one, you can go to rawmotivations.com today to be able to talk and to be able to interact more. When we talk about this piece of how to be able to identify a toxic person, their truth or their lies, a lot of this also comes from my own experience because this is how I showed up. This is how I showed up consistently for years as a liar to everyone, but then especially a liar to my wife, with going through different stages of lying to her about affairs, of lying to her about every single aspect of my life because I wanted to make sure that I was right, that I was good, that I looked a certain way, that I had this certain image, whatever it might be in the moment, I was always lying. And so when it comes down to it, one of the hard things for people is how do we actually identify, how do we actually see the lies? One thing that is key inside the narcissistic relationship that is hard for people to be able to latch onto, but needs to be latched onto almost first, is that actions speak louder than words. In the relationship with a toxic person, you're going to have him talk and say a lot of words, say a lot of things that sound great, that sound wonderful, that sound like he's checking and fixing all the boxes. But at the end of the day, he's wordsmithing and putting all these things together to use this charm to manipulate you, to bring you to a place where you think you're believing something that's actually true, when in reality, it's completely false. Narcissists will sell you on anything. They'll convince a wall that they're in love with them. Like it's amazing how many times a narcissist can actually use words to manipulate people into believing, thinking, or exasperating them into believing that in reality, even though it's not true. So a narcissist will do this so many times, but the actions typically don't follow it up. At least not consistently, and at least not long term. And so the actions typically reveal the truth of the situation, what's actually happening. And what you see is what their actions and their words completely contradict. It's this giant red flag that happens in the relationship, but the problem is majority of the time you don't see it. You don't actually acknowledge that it's actually happening. And so you need to understand a narcissist will continue to do this and continue to try to manipulate and coerce you to see a certain version of reality when in reality, it's not even true at all. The hard part is you actually disconnecting some of your feelings about their words from the actual truth, the actual reality of the situation. When you do this, you start to actually move forward in your freedom, in your healing, in your growth, in your change. But the problem is the majority of time you'd rather believe their words than you would believe their actions, because their actions aren't going to feel good. They're not going to feel like validating. They're not going to feel loving. It's because they aren't. But when you put that up with the words, oftentimes it produces this piece of cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance is the aspect of holding two opposing thoughts at the same time. Easiest way to explain that is, do I believe his words or do I believe his actions? It feels easier to believe his words because the actions don't feel good. So oftentimes a person will create this alternate piece, this alternate reality of like, well, he's just struggling at work. That's why he's treating me like this. It'll be okay. It'll eventually pass. Like, this is just him being immature. Like, we'll just work through this. I'll help him with this. This is just him with his addiction to alcohol. I'll just help him get sober. We'll work through this and it'll get better. And so there's all these different stories and these lies that you tell yourself, making yourself think that it's going to get better, when in reality, you just have to look at the actions. Like, so think of it like you have a person who is in your life and he's been consistently promising change. saying he's trying, saying he's going to get better, saying this is going to happen, but continues with the abusive behavior. No matter what you do, he's still showing up as an abusive asshole. Like, no matter what, it shows a stark contrast between his words and between his actions. This will continue to perpetuate for as long as you allow it, because the narcissist wants you to continue to believe the lies that he's telling you versus the truth that he's showing you. Now, the second piece of like how do we actually spot a toxic person's lies or truth comes down to shady behaviors and avoidance of accountability. Narcissists are great at avoiding accountability, at avoiding responsibility, like running away from it, redirecting the conversation, hiding from it, moving from it, all these different things to be able to convince you that it wasn't that big of a deal. Narcissists oftentimes tend to engage in different behaviors that are shady, that are like, wait a second, what's actually going on? And in doing this, a lot of times is trying to be able to remove themselves from being held accountable, from taking responsibility in the situation. You might be like, he's acting really weird about his phone. Like he's acting really weird about where he went last night. His stories don't seem to match up. There seems to be something just odd. But when I ask about it, he just gets frustrated that I'm even questioning him, because of course I should trust him. He's my husband, like all these things. And you start to like doubt yourself because of how he's actually treating. And so typically a narcissist will treat you in different ways to deflect blame onto you or onto other people. They'll dodge questions, kind of like you ask a simple question, they're like, oh, well, let me tell you about this, or let me tell you about this. Or they create distractions to divert your attention from the lies. Narcissists are great at creating like smoke and mirrors of you looking in different direction, of you thinking different thing, of you getting confused and blinded by the lies that they're telling you versus what is actually true. So you need to understand, like taking a step back and being like, wait a second, like this doesn't seem to match up. Like you have to look at a lot of the relationship with the narcissist very much analytically and even like logically to be able to see there's inconsistencies here. Like this doesn't seem to match up when he says this, but he does something different. There seems to be different things that he's like hiding something. Like you might even have this like gut feeling of like, I just don't feel like something is right, but you can't put your finger on it. Now, it might be a good idea for you to try to just look into it, see what's actually there, see what's going on. Like you might end up catching him texting someone else or sexting someone else and be like, this is not right. This doesn't make me feel comfortable. And he blames it on you. He blames it on it's a joke with his work. It was a prank that they did. Like he'll do all these different things, but you start to notice this pattern of like shady behavior. And you're like, this doesn't seem to be right. Narcissist oftentimes is going to do this to deflect, to be able to move away from being accountable for their own actions. Now, number 3, when we bring down the aspect of like how to actually catch a person or how to actually spot if they're actually lying or if they're telling the truth. And one of the big ways is an unwillingness to embrace transparency. And I would also say false transparency. So like you have one aspect of false transparency, which is a narcissist that says, hey, ask me anything. I'm an open book. Just ask me anything and I'll tell you whatever you need to know. This is an aspect of false transparency. And what I mean by this is a narcissist wants you to ask them anything so that he knows how to be able to conjure his answer to be able to get the right answer so he can avoid accountability for something. Okay, like if you ask the question, then the narcissist has a more perspective of how much you actually know. Part of this is to figure out how much you know, to figure out how much to tell, to figure out what needs to be revealed or not revealed to get them back in a state that they're acceptable in your eyes and you're not kicking them out. Okay, so part of like, hey, ask me anything, I'm an open book, is manipulation. Like narcissists do this, I did this like all the time because I wanted to know, what do you know? So I can figure out what I actually want to tell you. All it is a manipulative game. This other piece of like false transparency. Another example would be like, hey, like you have access to my phone anytime you want. Just let me know, I'll give it to you. Okay, like it's this piece of like, oh, it feels better. Like he's telling me this, but when you go to get the phone or you go to ask him about the phone, he's like, yeah, sure, let me finish this. He's deleting a bunch of stuff and then he gives it to you. Or he's hiding the app that he's in. Like there's multiple ways to do this. Versus like there being this transparency, like this full-blown transparency of like, hey, my phone's unlocked, access it whenever you want. Like, hey, here's the passcode, like you can jump on it whenever you want. Hey, actually, here's a way where we can link our accounts together so you can see every person I message, you can see every like DM that I send or that I receive. How is that? Like, would that help with transparency? You don't see this. Okay, you see narcissists doing the bare minimum and then being like, gosh, like you should be trusting me now because I've been providing my location when I get to work like every 6 days. Like you'll see narcissists do like the very bare minimum and expect you to be like, oh my gosh, she's giving me full transparency. No, that's not the case. So there's this unwillingness a lot of times for narcissists to actually have full transparency. Like they lack this piece of transparency because they'd rather hide, keep the secrets, hide information, create smoke screens, half truths, all these things. And the resistance to be open oftentimes will indicate deceit, oftentimes indicate that they're lying. And so you might be like, but he's just struggling. He's just doing all these things. No, like if he actually wants to save the relationship, if he actually wants to work on himself, there has to be this level of honesty, of stop lying and actually move forward in the truth. If he's not willing to do that, then the relationship is going to die because you cannot build a relationship built on lies. It has to be built on truth. So if you're in a relationship and he becomes defensive, evasive, when you're asking about his whereabouts, when you're asking about unexplained absences, and like he's showing you an unwillingness to actually be transparent, you probably should run because you don't have someone who actually cares about you, respects you, or is willing to develop this honesty level and this transparency underneath the surface to actually work on themselves, to better the relationship, to be honest with you. If I can help at all, please go to rawmotivations.com. Would love to interact with you one-on-one there. Or if you're ready to jump to a challenge, start off with the 45-day challenge at claritychallenge.net.